Hello there, my name is Rebecca, and I'm excited to share with you my reflective learning portfolio and talk a little bit about what I learned about the Metis during the course of this class. The music you just heard was called the Strong Woman Song by All Our Relations Metis Drum Circle, and that was actually recorded in Oshawa, which I thought was amazing, and I really enjoyed that song. The Métis are the mixed-race descendants of the original unions between First Nations women and European settler men that took place during the North American fur trade in the 17th and 18th centuries. These intermarriages gave rise to a new Indigenous people who would gradually develop their own unique customs, language, and religion, and form what is now called the Métis Nation. Prior to taking this class, I would have thought that Métis was another name for a different tribe of Indigenous Canadians, like Micmac or Algonquin. I was unaware that they were a distinct cultural group, and I thought that was really interesting that I was not aware of something that was so important to the history of Canada and the settling of where I live. I thought a lot about what does it mean to be Canadian and what am I? How is my culture Canadian? What is culture to me personally? Early on in this class, I learned about cultural symbols and why they're important. And they're important because they provide unity in a cultural community and help the community to feel that they are identifiable and represented by a shared symbol. In order to learn a bit more about the importance of cultural symbols, I did just do some research online to see if I could help improve my own understanding and develop my own opinion about these cultural symbols. I learned that a cultural symbol is a physical manifestation that signifies the ideology of a particular culture or simply has meaning within a culture. Culture itself can be defined by the accumulation of the beliefs, traditions, languages, and values of a particular group of people. So there is a reason why I chose pictures of the fiddle to go with this slideshow, and that's because I recognize the fiddle as a symbol of my own personal culture, as well as a symbol of the Métis culture. Learning about the importance of music and the fiddle, especially to the Métis culture, made me reflect on my own family and their love of fiddle music. My grandfather was a very proficient and talented fiddle player. He also sometimes did jigs and step dancing, and our whole family would get involved with playing music together. And as you can see, multiple fiddle players happening in my family. So it made me feel as though our family has some connection to the Indigenous culture despite being European descent Canadians. I also wanted to talk about my and my family's love of the water. This is my mom in Algonquin Park, somewhere she took me many times when I was younger. I also had a grandparents that lived at Lake Koshabog, and interestingly enough, we could get to Petroglyphs Provincial Park just over the water from there. I also had grandparents that lived outside of Bracebridge and on Camel Lake in Muskoka area, and so my love of the water was really encouraged. I have my own canoe now, and I like to do canoe trips that include portages, and I find that that's very interesting that the voyageurs did that as well, but I can only imagine what they went through carrying those large bundles of fur over long distances. So I have a lot of respect for everything they did. It would be fair to wonder, why am I talking about myself so much when talking about something I learned in a class about the Métis? Well, in the course of learning about the Métis, I suddenly recognized that my culture as a Canadian or multi-generational Canadian is actually very reflective of some of the things I've learned about the Métis culture. My parents had two huskies when I was growing up, and dog sledding was a pastime of ours as well. And I learned that dog sledding was also an important part of the Métis culture. Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm the creator of this presentation, and I just wanted to take a quick moment to sort of recap what I learned about this class and what I've taken from it. So, the significance to me is that I've never had adequate education about Indigenous Canadian issues. It was very briefly touched upon in my grade 10 history program. and it was only essentially a brief touch upon the residential school system with really no emphasis on the lasting impact that the residential school system has had and the significance of what Canadians did with colonization, how we sort of impacted the Indigenous community. I wanted to talk about the fact that when I went to find resources for even this project and the historic Métis community report, the only books that I could find in the Whitby Public Library were in the juvenile nonfiction section. There were some novels written by Métis people about Métis issues, but they were novels, not really like resources where you could go for historical information. So I found that that was really shocking to me, and I feel like there needs to be more of an emphasis on this education for Canadians like myself, and more awareness overall. Um, I should have learned about this sooner. I didn't understand that the Métis were distinct from other tribes of First Nations people. I mentioned that earlier in my presentation, but I had actually no idea. So I feel kind of silly now, but I've increased my awareness, which is really awesome. I am an SSW student, or a social service worker student. I'm also an RPN, and I have been for about 15 years. So I've gained a lot of understanding and a level of comfort working with Indigenous clients now. And I feel like I have a more understanding of their culture and where they're coming from and their experiences. And I'm also more comfortable with asking questions about their experiences. And I don't think I would have achieved that without taking this class. I talked in the presentation about, symbols, cultural symbols. So I saw cultural symbols in my own family. We are, for the most part, multi generational Canadians that came over in the 18th and 19th century. Very few people were born. Only my one great grandmother was born in England, but aside from that, everyone's multi generational Canadian. But we have something in common with Indigenous Canadians, or Metis, and that was fiddle music, the love of the water and nature and canoeing, and dog sledding. And I have wondered a lot about Canadian culture and what is Canadian culture and what does that mean. And I keep thinking like Tim Hortons and hockey, but neither of those things are significant to me. But taking this class and learning about the cultural symbols of Indigenous Canadians and the Métis made me see that there is actually some evidence that this Canadian culture has actually ingrained itself in my family and in myself. So I thought that was really neat. And I saw that we can make connections to other cultures that are different from our own through art, music, and dance, and other things like that. So while we may all have differences, we have things that bind us together as parts of different cultures. And I think that's really a significant and important thing for me to have taken away from the class. And I feel like it's breaking down some barriers for me personally because I have had plenty of experience dealing with people from other cultures with a 15-year career in nursing, but the level of comfort has changed for me, and I see that evidenced by the interactions I've had with clients that I've had at my placement who have had Indigenous heritage, and talking to them about that and learning about it and what it means to them. And I feel like that's something I wouldn't have done without the learning that I did in this class. So now when I think about what is it to be Canadian, or an Indigenous Canadian, or a member of the Métis Nation, I have this whole new perspective, and I think that's so awesome. So thank you for all the learning that we did in this class. I think it was presented effectively, and I really benefited from it. So thank you very much for everything you taught us this semester.